Get ready to tune into stories of average men striving for greatness, to become the leaders that are needed in their homes, in their career, and their communities. This is the Brotherhood of Fatherhood podcast.
What's up, brothers? This is Scott, and today on the Brotherhood of Fatherhood podcast, we have Mattew Paetz. He is the coach's coach, and I am excited to have this conversation. His focus is on helping clients understand their early childhood survival patterns and root cause of emotional trauma. Why? Because he has an amazing story. We're going to dig into that because I think we all have stories that we deal with, and quite honestly, until we deal with those stories in our early childhood, we're not going to grow the way we need to grow. But first, if you have not plugged yourself into the Brotherhood of Fatherhood, you need to hop on Facebook, search Brotherhood of Fatherhood in groups, and join. Now, if you're not on Facebook, you should get on Facebook just for that reason. You can skip all the other BS, go right to that group where you can have conversations, get advice, see what's up in other men's lives. Just do it. It's awesome. Another thing you should do, of course, is listen to this podcast, learn more. We have amazing guests. And one way that you can support us is by subscribing, liking, leave a review. That would be an extra dope step on your behalf. And without further ado, welcome to the show, Matthew. How are you doing, man?
I'm doing wonderful, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah. So the coach's coach, we've had some chats, and I've heard a little bit of your story, but really just looking forward to digging into that. But yeah, I'm just excited to dig into it. I don't know what else to say. Yeah.
It's like a first date.
It is like a first date. It's very common. And one thing that I've done from the very beginning is just be myself on here. So sometimes I'm a little awkward, but I'm cool with it. So you got recommended to me by Dennis Meralda, who's a friend of mine, and he had you on his podcast, and couldn't have enough to say. So now that I've set it up in that, what are you all about, man?
It's so funny. Like, it's just that question at, in the beginning of every class or like, seminar you go to, like, tell us about yourself. And you're like,
I like animals.
Yeah, exactly. Long walks on the beach. Is that what we say? No. So, my background, as you're probably going to hear shortly, is pretty layered. But in regards to what I do today, current day, the coach's coach, because I love to support individuals who have reached a specific place in their journey where they have decided that they really want to live in service, right? They want to better understand how to help others overcome something that, they've been through. And it's my intention to step into that journey and support people in understanding like just the deeper nuances of their stories, and really identify the difference between, what someone teaches versus what someone coaches, and really learn how to extract the wisdom from your struggles, right, versus just the pain, because I truly believe that it's our struggles that make us the authority, right, not our perfections. So without me, you may find me going down rabbit holes pretty frequently here, so feel free to interject at any time.
I like rabbit holes. I gotta be honest, I love rabbit holes sometimes. Yeah, so I do it all the time as well. I want to before we step and go any further, I mean, you've been coaching for 4 years. Coaching seems like it's kind of just exploded. Maybe it's just my focus on that world or my foray into podcasting in different realms. I talk to coaches every single day. But 4 years is a little longer than most that I talk to. So you started pre-pandemic, but a lot of coaches came out pandemic. So were you full-time coaching before? I mean, were you doing this full-time?
Yeah. So I've been full-time for a few years now. I'd say 2 or 3 of those. I've been full-time. Now, full-time doesn't mean I was always doing well.
Let's be honest.
But I was doing it full-time. But only in the last couple of years have I really been able to find my thing, if you will. Right. Like it started out as a dating coach and, it turned into all different things. I had someone actually ask me on a sales call not too long ago what my pronouns were, my coaching pronouns. Like, so what do you identify as? Like, what do you call yourself? And I thought that was so hilarious because, in the coaching space, you really just kind of come up with your own titles. Which can be fun, but it can also be really challenging when someone's like, so, what do you do? What do you coach? And you're like, what's the most clever thing I can say that I haven't heard someone else say yet? But long-winded way of saying that, over the past couple of years, I really been able to better understand not just, who I support, but also how. And why that specific group. So for anyone that is in the coaching space or started, has recently, began their journey as a coach, trust the process. It's going to unfold. It's going to morph more often than you would probably like. But I do believe that is a part of what makes someone, gives someone the ability to become a great coach.
Yeah, I want to get to your story. I'm really excited to get to your story, but I do want to sit in this for a minute because a lot of people are talking about being coaches, have tried being coaches, have failed at being coaches. I have a lot of people that I know that have succeeded at being coaches, and rarely does it start where they start, or where does it end or evolve to where they started. Like I got into that whole scene to coach men, and I was like, oh, I want to coach men. And it began with one thing, and then it morphed into another thing, and nothing was hitting. But the thing was, didn't give up, and it turned into something completely different, which actually it just ended up into a service that, not a coaching service, but that coaching, that sight line of coaching led me to where I needed to be, which was trusting the process. And it's painful, isn't it? Sometimes.
Oh my God.
Ridiculous.
It's the amount of, nights I have spent near panic, and even recently, just a few days ago, I just recently launched something that I'm really excited about. But yet again, it's taking me into the unknown, right? It's new territory. It feels uncertain, which triggers all your things, right? Which I'm sure we'll get into. But yeah, I think when you put yourself out there and decide that you're going to create something that's bigger than you, I assume, not being one yet, but I assume it's much like being a parent, where it's like it's the point of no return, and every day is going to challenge you in the most beautiful of frustrating ways. I think when someone really embarks on a journey, and I don't think it's just coaching, I think it's any entrepreneurial endeavor, when you decide that you're going to create something, the act of creation means you're building something that doesn't currently exist, right? So you're going to forever live in the unknown. Like there's familiar is is gone at that point.
Well, that was what was hitting my mind. We're talking about coaching, and I'm like, wow, this is such an amazing analogy for a business owner. It's an amazing analogy for getting married. It's an amazing analogy for having a kid. You really are stepping into unknowns, and where you think you're going is rarely where you end up. Yeah. And the more you can just step into the process, fail, all the failures, all the speed bumps, all the roadblocks and detours are all a part of the process, as long as you're learning and growing.
And I think the big key here, I often speak about, living through principles or values versus context of story or goals. And, one thing that I am really beginning to understand a little deeper than I ever have is that when you're creating something that that doesn't currently exist, right? Be it, and I mean creating something in your life, right? It doesn't mean that you're out building something that the world has never seen, right? But when you're creating something in your life that is brand new to you, be it a healthy relationship, be it a business, be it a new fitness or diet routine, whatever it is, I think it's more important to focus on trust versus confidence. Right? What I mean by trust is, do you trust yourself to show up? Do you trust yourself to follow through even when it feels messy? Do you trust that you are going to stand for what's right when it's not convenient. And, you know, I think when someone develops a deeper sense of trust in themselves, anything at that point is possible, right? Because you're never going to feel confident, right? Things will become a little more familiar to you, and it's going to feel a little less triggering, perhaps, right? Your relationship to it gets to evolve. But I don't think that there's ever really, I think confidence is, it's the wrong like metric to score your abilities by, right?
It's like I needed to hear this personally today. Thank you very much, by the way. I mean, you just, there's a lot of depth in there. There's a lot of depth in what you just said. This whole trust yourself thing. I mean, even, yeah. I don't even know where to go with it because my brain is going in all different directions, and I think this is good. And I think my brain is hopping from all the things that men, you know, in doing this for the time that I've been doing it, and the messages I get, and the things I see guys post and ask questions about. There's a lot of struggle with not trusting themselves, a lot of struggle with stepping out of what they know into something different. And what I've seen over and over again is that place where the lack of confidence and the lack of trust in themselves is literally holding them back from saving their marriage, is literally holding them back from being a good father, from getting an upgrade in their financial life, from starting a business, from getting a raise and being a better employee. I mean, like everything has this one little, like, it's like a marble when you're skateboarding, right? Like you hit it and it just, you come to a sudden stop instead of like, what can I do to get around this marble? And that's just trusting yourself, stepping out and going into that unknown and going through it.
And even if you hit the marble and eat shit, right? Trust yourself that you'll come back.
Well, that's going to happen a lot of times.
Yeah. And I often talk about too, I think, you know, when it comes to any type of transformation, which is really what we're talking about, right? When you're creating something brand new, we're talking about a transformation. And if you really want to go deeper with that, it's an identity transformation that's required, right? But I think what's most important is to understand that any transformation or any success in any area that's important to you in your life, it's about learning how to recover more quickly versus how to appear perfect.
Yeah.
Right. Like imagine if all we did was focused on recovering more quickly, right? How much anxiety would go away? How many fears and of the uncertainty would go away if you knew that what mattered was the ability to recover more quickly versus, oh, I can't do this because I'm pretty certain it's not going to be perfect. So I need to hold back until, you know, I think it'll be perfect, be it a relationship, be it a business, be it a gym routine, be it, I mean, name it, right? It doesn't matter. It's all the things.
What a setup for failure. If you literally are waiting and trying to get everything aligned to be perfect, you're not going to hit the mark. It's not going to happen. So you're wasting all this time trying to get there. Then when you get there, you're set up for failure. You fail and you're like, see, I suck.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think too, kind of what we're touching on is a relationship to information, right? What I mean by that specifically is feedback, right? Be it from your market, be it from your spouse, be it from your children, be it from your boss, doesn't matter, but feedback. And I think oftentimes, you know, when we are focused on being perfect, our relationship to that feedback is evidence of our failures, right? Versus that information being feedback that allows me to refine what it is I'm doing and be able to move it a little further along.
Yeah.
Right? I think a lot of times we're afraid of that information. We're afraid of those critiques because, and this is myself right now, like I'm not at all talking about anything that I'm not currently experiencing. Literally this morning.
Right.
So, you know, I think when you can trust yourself to show up despite the discomfort, right, then you're capable of you know, creating something well beyond your imagination.
So good. There's several thoughts that came to mind. Number one, I had a rough morning, had a rough night, and I pride myself as being very vulnerable. I pride myself as having an incredible marriage. Like, been married for 25 years. We started as best friends, you know, dated in high school, the whole thing. And there's still, like, last night, my confidence was just like nothing within my marriage. And I'm like, what is the problem? And it's a constant struggle. But one thing that I don't know why it stuck with me, but about 5 years ago, for some reason I was drawing. I do get a creative edge once in a while. And I was drawing and I drew a phoenix, and I was like, you know, I don't even know what a phoenix is. You know, it's this bird and there's always fire involved. And I'm like, it's just really cool looking. And I looked it up and I'm like, whoa, like, you know, something born from the ashes of failure or loss or whatever. And it really almost gave me permission. That visual, that story gave me permission to look at all of my failures in life, and be that image alone, and researching what it was gave me permission to be like, wow, I can basically rebirth myself into something better from that crash and burn. And, you know, it's actually one of the pieces that led to the Brotherhood of Fatherhood. I crashed and burned as a father and a husband early in my years. And here I am. This is something better is birthed out of it. So there's also this, like, giving yourself permission to go there and be okay with, man, falling flat on our face probably daily. I mean, quite honestly.
And I think too, when you going back to trust, right, tying this together. And first, I just want to acknowledge what you shared, because, you know, although you didn't go into detail, you experienced it all over again, just saying that you had a rough night and a rough morning, right? So I just want to take a second and acknowledge that, you know, that was, you know, a very real moment and worthy of being honored. And proud of you for showing up, whatever that meant or whatever that looks like, or, you know, it's, you know, I think it's just important to acknowledge. But what I was going to say is, you know, trusting yourself. So, here's the point. I kind of lost track for a second. So when it comes to trust, right, think about it in terms of, I'm going to use the analogy of battle, right? Having never been in battle. So all respects to those who have. But what I'm thinking about here is, like, who would you trust more, right? If you were going to go out in battle and you had to follow someone, and, you know, one guy comes in and his uniform is pristine. I mean, all the buttons are aligned. It's tucked the way it's supposed to be. It's pristine. And he's, you know, speaking about what plan he's going to, you know, take you to complete, right? Whatever it is, what mission. Or you have another guy that walks in who's tattered, right? He's been in the field, lived it, came back, right? And he's the one that's telling you what's going to happen in fewer words. Right? You know, which one do you think you would actually trust more?
Right.
It's
the guy that's been through the battle and looks 100%. Like he's been through the battle. Yeah.
And that's the irony, right? We don't even trust perfection.
Right.
Yet we're trying to accomplish it. Right. So I think when you allow yourself to recognize that it's everything that you thought or think that disqualifies you, those are the very things that make you highly qualified to do whatever it is that you're pursuing, right? To support whoever it is you were uniquely designed to support, right? It's the fact that, you know, you've messed it up a few times. That makes you qualified to be a great father. It's the fact that, you know, you've really fucked up in relationships. That's what makes you qualified to grow into a great partner and a great husband. Right. It's not, I think it's when we try to hide those things, even from ourselves, you know, that's where we really begin to go down a path that is so much more difficult and so unnecessary. Right. In an attempt to appear as if, right? I used to say, like, I was a professional appear as if, like, that was my whole thing. Right. It was, you know, and I'm learning the difference between performance, right, that appearance, to presence, right, this being, this understanding, this deeper knowing, and just being able to be present with a situation, present with a person, present with a conversation, present with a goal, right? versus performing. So I have a lot of things that I could jump into here.
Yeah. Just something that I've learned, especially while speaking on, I feel like sometimes I have to be a voice, or I feel called to be a voice to speak things, or at least say them. So maybe it falls on a few ears of what I believe have been real impactful forward facing moments that have moved me forward. One of them was really coming to grips that the stories I tell my boys, my sons, I tell more stories to them. And I think this is quite flipping the script from a lot of dads. I don't live the glory days. They ask me questions about, I used to skate. How good were you, Dad? What could you do? And then, when did you learn to drive? And all these things I feel real prideful. How did you learn to shoot a gun so well? All these things. But then I learned to flip the script and tell them really where I've messed up in life. And I'm looking for opportunities where they're messing up and where I can relate that to where I messed up, because I've learned that once you can embrace that stuff that's happened and pass it, like that is like my big torch that I want to pass, is like, here's all the errors I've made and other men have made, and here's what you don't need to go through, because I'm going to pass this torch to you. I'm going to live this failure out. I'm going to tell you what it did for me and how I moved forward with it. So I just feel so incredibly strong about being very vulnerable and being very open and reliving our life from a point of teaching rather than standing on a pedestal and look how amazing I am, puff my chest out. And, I was first string football team and live vicariously through our kids, but also in this regard, give our kids permission to mess up, because they're going to mess up all the time. Yeah. And then to learn from it. So here's where I want to go with this now. I want to hear some of your stories. You didn't just get into talking this deep about trusting yourself and failure. And you didn't get to a place as a man where you're so vulnerable without going through a crap load of crap. I'm sure, because if you're coaching, in lines to things with trauma, you obviously have experienced trauma. That seems to be how these things go. So whatever you're willing to share, give our listeners a little bit of background about really what brought you full circle to what you are doing today.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll give the cliff notes here, and I'll let you kind of lead us after wherever you want to take it. But my story's layered. I'll say this quick little disclaimer: you don't get into psychology because you have your shit together.
I noticed that. I have a degree in psychology. I noticed that.
So I pursued psychology because I was on a mission to understand and really heal myself. Right. In the beginning, it wasn't healing. I was just trying to better understand my experiences. Right. And my story, really, the cliff notes are early childhood sexual abuse from an older male. Roughly 5 to 6 years. So about, 5 to 11 years old. Quite literally, there's no two things that men can do with each other sexually that I did not experience by my 6th birthday. So that led to, struggles with sexuality, that led to struggles with, understanding my self-worth. I truly believed going into my early adult years, early 20s, that I used to say it all the time, like I believe that my purpose on this planet was to be a physical experience for other people. And that led into I was literally an escort for a while. I fell into drugs and alcoholism, and nearly committed suicide on a cocaine crash. When I say nearly, it's because the method in which I would have followed through, had I done it, there would have been no coming back. Right? I had a loaded .45 caliber handgun. Oh, yeah. And, to skip some of the detail, my girlfriend, my partner now, my life partner, Allison, she and we've been together going into 6 years, but the beginning of our relationship is when we met, I was just beginning my spiral, right? And our relationship really kind of put that in the fast lane for me. It was love at first sight, literally. Our story's kind of funny, but it was love at first sight. And, but in the beginning, our patterns began dating, right? The humans fell in love, and then our patterns began to date. And both of our patterns were pretty, we'll say, triggering to one another, right? And, it's our relationship has taught me more about psychology than any book or degree I've ever, completed. And yeah, I mean, I could take this 100 different places, but I've dealt with overwhelming public scrutiny. I've dealt with, the immense amount of shame that comes with the decisions I've made throughout my life and the things that I had experienced. And that's really the, kind of putting the foundation here. Like that's what I build my programs and my stories on is, understanding the deeper nuances of what goes on behind closed doors. Right. So one of the things that, as a man's man, I grew up on a farm in Indiana, rural Indiana. Right. So it's big trucks, beer, football, guns, it's what you think about in the quintessential like man's man type of world. And I struggle with everything from, again, my sexuality to what it means to be a man to, really carrying a lot of shame around feeling like a coward, not feeling good enough, strong enough, smart enough, rich enough, all of these things. And I'll say that, when I fell in love with Allison, that's when it all came to the surface because, there's only two things that will expose any human being rather, but there's only two things that'll expose you for every single insecurity and every single survival pattern if you wish to make them successful. And those two things are falling in love and starting your own businesses, right? There's no way that either of those two things, those two relationships, business or romance, can grow beyond the individual.
So true.
Right. So it was my relationship with Allison that really, brought it's like dredging a lake. It's kind of how I describe it, right? You bring the shit up to the surface so you can clean it out. But in the process, it was the messiest. It was shameful at times, terrifying always. And quite frankly, the best decision I ever made was to continue to recover.
Yeah. That's yeah. So your relationship with Allison was the catalyst for your massive change.
Yeah, the timing of it was brilliant in many ways. It was I knew that. So the love at first sight is a huge part of our story, right? Not just in conversation, but in regards to the transformation, because what I learned in those early years was that basically what had happened is I had finally met someone that meant more to me than my stuff, right? I met the thing that I'm like, okay, not walking away from this. So I got to face some shit head on. Right. And I learned how to do that through her grace, through her kindness, through the space that she would create for me to fuck up, right? Quite a bit. Like I said, in the beginning of our relationship, there were drugs in my life. There were, very promiscuous relationships. There were, all the shame and depression. I was really fun at parties and really difficult to date.
Yeah. So this is the question that kind of comes to my mind is you found this love at first sight, this relationship basically was the start of really bringing things full circle, where you saw something bigger than your troubles, where you saw, so for men, and I'm sure you've experienced this working with people going through trauma, for men who've experienced trauma. And let me be clear. I don't think there's very many people that get through their childhood without some sort of trauma that, there's just varying levels of it.
Yeah.
And
I'll jump all over that. But
yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So there's men who are in relationships. They even have kids. They have jobs, but they are stuck. They are so stuck that they literally cannot be a better husband. They literally cannot be a good dad. And they literally are stuck in a career that sucks because they're stuck. They haven't found, or they haven't attached those things that they have, they're bigger in their life, like their kids, their spouse, their girlfriend, whatever it is, to change. What do you say to someone like that? Because you obviously had this thing and it was boom. It was huge. It was right in front of you. I got to do this. I got to go through this.
Well, I think the biggest thing that comes up right away is, whether it's children, whether it's falling in love, those two things specifically, I think in this conversation are important to look at. If a man, I think anybody, but I'm going to speak directly to the men here. I think if a man doesn't have qualified support in his life, during those phases, and when I say qualified support, I mean like genuine mentorship.
Right.
It's extremely common that the presence of things bigger than yourself that actually matter to you more than anything else in the world, if you don't have qualified support to help you navigate that, what often happens is it's not an inability to be a good husband. It's not the inability to become a good father or be a good father, but rather the presence of things bigger than yourself highlight your insecurities in such a way that we use those struggles, we use those insecurities as evidence of our not enough, right? Because I have children, it's only proving that I'm not strong enough, smart enough, rich enough, blah, blah. Falling in love with someone is only brought up, these insecurities, which are the evidence that I'll never be enough. I'll never be, supportive, protective, whatever, all the things, right? So I think, it's extremely important to recognize that it's not an inability, but rather it's the relationship to what comes up because of the proximity of something that's bigger than you. And that's where, that was, I don't have children yet, but that was my relationship to Allison, right? In the very beginning, it was like, because I couldn't avoid my stuff. It was just constantly, it was a constant reflection of the parts of myself that I believed were broken and flawed. And the way that I would protect myself, right, emotionally, anytime that I felt that insecurity is, and this is true, and I think many, being politically correct, I believe it's true in all of us, but was to project anger.
Yeah.
Right. And it wasn't Allison that I was actually afraid of. Right. But it was the fact that at that stage, when I was my most angry, right, it was a big part of my transformation was facing my anger. When I was going through that, the biggest lesson that Allison taught me that during that time that's really resonated with me is understanding that two realities can exist at one time. What I mean by realities, I mean emotional experiences, right? And the one thing she would say to me, and it always resonated, now I live by it, is that, I'm gonna use anger as an example, is that you can be angry and kind at the same time.
True.
Right? And it took me years to understand what that meant, right? Because, being angry, really what it is just a projection of insecurity, right? I often say, anger is a weak man's attempt at strength, right? It's kind of like if a bar fight, let's say breaks out, which guy are you actually more afraid of? The one that's popping off, trying to scream at you and call you all the names, or the guy that's behind him that's just a little too calm for that situation? Right? Yeah. The guy that's a little too calm has nothing to prove because he's aware that he trusts that he can handle whatever happens, right? There's trust in his training. Whereas the guy that's popping off, he's projecting insecurity, and his attempt at staying safe is to intimidate you so that you don't expose him, right? same in relationships, right? I'm going to intimidate my partner so that you don't expose my weaknesses, my insecurities, etc., or perceived weaknesses, I should say, right? Same with children, don't you dare, talk to me that way. Don't you dare talk about, but it's like all these things. I find that when you go from projecting to presence, right? When you trust your training, you trust your ability to recover when you don't get it perfect, right? You trust that your example is what makes you a great father, not your perfection, right? And I think the biggest thing too in this case is, instead of it's no because I said so, right? It's no and this is why. Right? Give some context, I think, is extremely important. And when you mess up, if you pop off, if you get angry, if you say something you really didn't mean in the moment, whatever that looks like, have the courage to go back to your children, go back to your spouse, and explain what you were feeling in that moment and why you projected. Because what I find is that those that, it's not the popping off that creates the issue, right? It's the unwillingness to go back and reflect, with the people that experienced your anger, experienced your, your projection, because what you're doing is creating an understanding, right? With understanding, there's no trauma.
Yeah.
Right? Doesn't mean it was great. Doesn't mean I liked it. But when I have a better understanding of what made you act that way, right, then it doesn't carry the sting that it would had you just popped off and then never come back around and talk to me about it, leaving me to feel as if it was, I'm not good enough, I'm the problem, I'm ruining your life, I'm the burden, blah blah, right? So I think it's important that we find the courage to go back once we've calmed down and better articulate what we were experiencing or what we were feeling at the time, right? Versus just saying, get over it, walk it off, man up.
Yeah, which is not a good, it's so difficult, because when I think of like man up, because that's a concept that comes into my head a lot when I watch as like this outside guide or outside observer. Sometimes in our group, men will say something, but they will take the victim mindset, like very like, well, I can't be fit because I go to work at 4 a.m. and I do this and I can't do this. And it's just this victim mindset. In my mind, I'm thinking, man up, dude, stop being such a wuss. But what I'm really thinking isn't like just man up. It's face your limitations and go after what's holding you back. Like it's a lack of courage. That's what I mean by that. And that statement in my head, maybe I need to reframe that, but a lot of men have a massive lack of courage.
And that's actually, yeah. So that's a huge one in my book. And what I often talk about is, I said at the top of the conversation that I like to look at life as living through principle or values, courage being one of them. Right? Context is irrelevant. Right? Human beings, we're emotional creatures with the ability to express logic. We're not logical creatures with the ability to express emotion. Right? Emotions are running the show at all times. Right. And one of my favorite things, especially working with men, when you hear like, oh, I'm not emotional. I'm like, how often do you get angry? Like all the time. I'm like,
you're really emotional.
Yeah. You want to talk about it? You want to unpack that a little bit? Because I don't know if you're aware, but anger is an emotion, right? You're highly emotional, right? It's impossible. It's biologically impossible not to be. Right. And, I think that, one of the, I'm going to jump into a little bit of the biology to make this make sense, right? Because that piece is really what helped me look at myself with a little more kindness, a little more grace, because I understood that, my behaviors were not a product of my flaws, right? But they were a product of survival based on, biology, which I'll jump into in a second. But I think that what often happens in our culture, in our society as men, is that, imagine if you were born with a full tool belt, right? You got all the thing, you got the saw, the nails, the rulers, the drill, the hammer, you got all the things that you're going to need to build a beautiful home, right? A dream home. And excuse me. And imagine that your tool belt at birth is full, right? These tools specifically in this conversation are your emotions, right? There's happiness, there's joy, there's shame, there's guilt, there's excitement, there's, contentment, there's all these things, right? That's your full tool belt. And as we start going through our youth, we, instead of being given training on how to use each one of those tools, like we would train someone, building it, like a carpenter would train an apprentice, right? This is how you use these tools at this time for this reason. This is why, that pencil may not be the strongest tool in your belt, but it may be the most important when it comes to marking where you're going to cut, right? So it's understanding how to use each of these emotions and why they exist inside of us. What often happens, instead of being taught how to use each tool effectively, people start removing our tools, right? Specifically, you're not allowed to feel shame. You're not allowed to feel insecure. You're not allowed to be scared. You're not allowed to, do all these things. And what is left of most men's tool belts are happiness and anger. Now go build a house. That's like being left with a hammer and a saw.
Right.
And you're like, cool, go build the house. And here's the thing. As a human being, you're hardwired to problem solve. You will figure out how to build a shelter using these two specific tools, right? It's all you have, so I'm going to use what I got. Problem is, how stable do you think that house is going to be if those are the tools you use? Right? You're just first sign of uncertainty, the first sign of any vulnerability, boom, that house is done. Right? So if we wouldn't expect to build a house with just a hammer and a saw, why in the hell would we expect to build a life with only those tools? Right? And this is where I think a lot of the conversation needs to shift, especially in men in our culture, is that, this idea of weakness, right? Show me anger and I'll show you weakness. Period. Right? The angriest man in the room is the weakest. How do I know this? I was him. I still navigate him. Right? The only time I've ever popped off and screamed and yelled, and by the way, my anger was never with other men or like out in the streets. My anger only showed up with my partners. If there's an ex of mine, listen to this, they probably got some stories.
Right.
I know they do. Right. So let me take this moment and say, I'm sorry. I better understand now. But the truth is that anger typically would only come out when a situation made me feel insecure. Right. So it was my insecurity that I was trying to protect. Right. That was it.
Yeah. I mean, that gives you if you really think through that and you step back and look at your own life like it's a movie, it's really easy to identify your insecurities and your presentation and what that really means. And it's probably a little horrifying for some people.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. But I think that is that really the first step, is stepping back and looking and seeing like, wow, that is why I do what I do.
I think it's learning to approach our lives in the same ways that we approach athletics, for example. Right? You play a game, you make some turnovers, you show up the next day and you watch film. Right? And then you go and practice. Right? And if you think, I'm gonna use football as an example, like if you think about football, if anyone's ever played, that in practice, the majority of the time you're in your position drills, right? You're out working with your specific position coaches and these kind of things. Rarely, or you don't scrimmage until the end of practice a lot of times. Right? But what happens in our lives is that we go to the game to practice. We never actually go and work on our positions, our weaknesses. We never look at film. We just show up to the game under the lights and try to act as if we got our shit together, right? When we've done no reps whatsoever, right? So I think that's what happens oftentimes when we don't have qualified support, is we go to our relationships to work out our shit instead of working out our shit and then coming back to the relationship.
Yeah.
Right. And there's no perfect way of doing this, but it's, if all you did is give yourself one extra moment where you're working on your stuff in your own time, be it with a coach or a therapist or reading or listening to a podcast like this one, whatever it is, that's like you know, sharpening your tools, and then bring whatever you take from it back to your relationship and practice, right? You're practicing being a great father. You're practicing being a great husband. You're practicing being a CEO of your company. It's practice. Right? And I think when we allow ourselves to practice these things with the expectation of course, I'm going to make mistakes, but I trust that I'm going to show back up. Right? That recovery process. Mm-hmm. That's where the skill is developed.
Yeah. I mean, it's a form of accepting your own flaws. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, there's so much good wrapped in that approach. I mean, that's, I feel like a therapy session here, but that's really what happened last night with me and my wife is I was acting like, or I was entering the game and not practicing first. Mm-hmm. Like, and then my own insecurities, like looking back at it, my own insecurities were the absolute everything to that whole issue. Mm-hmm. And why did I bring her into it? Mm-hmm. Like, you know, but yeah, it's so good because it's so applicable to pretty much everything we do and every difficulty we're having. Mm-hmm. And I love that. I love the football analogy. I love the analogy.
I'm a Colts fan, so Monday night last night was a rough night too. If anyone's watching in real time,
be watching film today.
Yeah. I hope they recover.
Yeah, right.
But no, I think I want to take a moment here and bring the biology piece full circle. Okay. So this, if any man listening to this or anyone listening to this takes nothing else away, this is what I hope that you gain. Right. And it's an understanding this aspect of our biology. When I say our biology, I spend a lot of time focusing on the nervous system. Right. So, and with that, fight, flight, freeze response.
Yep.
So, and anyone that's not familiar with what that is, it's fight, flight, freeze is basically how we act in the face of a real or perceived threat. Right. So bringing this all the way back now, between the ages of 0 to 6, right? All of us, all human beings, past, present, future, between the ages of 0 to 6, we establish over 60% of what we learn to be true about ourselves and the world around us, right? And when I say learn to be true, what I really mean is believe to be true, right? So from 0 to 6 years old, you're establishing well over half of what will eventually become your identity as an adult, right? Now, the other thing that's also extremely important to recognize is between 0 and 6, you're also 100% dependent on your caregivers to meet every single physical and emotional need required for your survival, right? So what this means is during the stage in your life where you're establishing well over half of what you believe to be true about yourself, you are 100% dependent on others, right? So when we are facing the not good enoughs, trust that that's not reality today. It's not that you're not good enough, right? But rather you're operating on a primitive system, on an outdated software that when you decided you weren't good enough or believed you weren't good enough, it's because you were probably at an age, 0 to 6, where you weren't strong enough yet. You weren't physically tall enough. You weren't capable of creating anything brand new. Like there was legit limitations on your abilities at that stage in your life. But as a 37-year-old man, I now know that I can, but my conditioning says that I'm incapable, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm kind of going down a rabbit hole here. So at any point, let me know if it's not tracking. So bring me back to an elephant. Say that in a second so I can tell a story. But the other thing that's important to recognize is that your nervous system, right? It's hardwired. Its sole priority is to keep you alive physically, right? And it only cares about the immediate moment, right? It does not give a damn about tomorrow. It doesn't give a shit about next week, 10 years from now, right? And it surely doesn't care about your hopes, wishes, and dreams, right? Its only concern is your immediate physical survival. So when I talk about safety, that's synonymous with survival, okay? Now, you are hardwired to avoid two very specific things in order to increase your chances of physical survival in any given moment, right? Those two things are, one, pain. We're hardwired to avoid pain at all costs, right? There's physical pain and emotional pain, right? Physical is pretty obvious. If you're allowing something to cause you physical pain, if you allow it to persist, it will eventually lead to harm or death, right? Well, same is true for emotional pain, right? If we allow something that's causing us emotional pain to persist, it will eventually lead to harm or death. This often looks like disease, depression, or worst case scenario, suicide, right? Those are three examples of long-term exposure to emotional pain, right? In many cases, obviously the disease one, there's outliers on everything, but trust that stress and anxiety lead to those things.
I was going to say, no doubt in my mind.
Yeah. So that's one, pain. The second thing, and what I believe shows up often, right? More often than the other, maybe, especially when we're creating, when we're stepping into something that's new to us, right? So you're hardwired to avoid anything unknown, right? Unknown means anything unknown to you personally. Doesn't matter if your best friend knows it, doesn't matter if your wife knows it, your kids know it, doesn't matter who knows it, right? If you yourself have never experienced this thing, your nervous system identifies the unknown as unpredictable. It identifies it as a threat to your physical survival because it's unpredictable, right? Predictability in the wild equals survival, right? So for example, imagine you and I many moons ago, we're leaving our cave, right? We're gonna go hunting for our tribe, and we come across an animal that neither of us has ever seen before. We have no idea what this animal is capable of, how it's going to defend itself, right? Because we are in unknown territory, we are at greater risk of harm or death, right? Let's say, other side of this, instead of coming across an animal, we're on the same hunt, but this time we venture off into the wilderness much further than you and I have ever gone before, right? By all definitions, we're lost. We have no idea where we are, right? Because we're in unknown territory. Now, again, our chances of physical survival has just decreased significantly. We don't know what threats are in the environment. We don't know how we're going to find shelter, food, blah, 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 like the list goes on, right? So survival is what you are filtering your environment for at all times, at all costs, right? Now, here's another piece. Why do we feel so threatened in relationships, right? So human beings, again, we are pack animals. We're tribal creatures. What this means is we require the acceptance of our pack in order to increase our chances of physical survival, right? If you've ever watched a documentary on pack animals before, you know, what happens to the one that gets left behind?
Dead, right?
Done,
Yeah.
right? Low-hanging fruit. This is human nature at its rawest form. We are pack animals. If we are excluded from the pack for any reason, right? Too sick, too slow, not strong enough, not rich enough, not our dicks aren't big enough, whatever it is that's not enough, we feel as it's a threat to our survival. Because if you were to learn this about me, you would abandon or reject me. And if that happens to me in the wild, I'm dead. Literally. So your nervous system is operating on a primitive survival, on survival, physical survival. But we're living in a modern world where our survival necessities are more guaranteed than they've ever been in human history, right? So what happens is, as I said earlier, your nervous system is identifying the environment for real or perceived threats, right? We're operating in a world of perceived threats, right? And the better way to describe this is being able to look at a situation and recognize whether or not you're in danger or you're just afraid. There's a difference.
It's really interesting because I used to really get, I would lose my decision-making skills, my confidence, everything would go out the window when I entered a room into other people that I saw as better leaders than me. I mean, it would totally, I've never thought of it from that primitive angle of like, this is a survival instinct, because it's like all of a sudden my ability to think rationally is gone. It's, I know better than this. I'm fine. I'm confident. I have assets. I have skills. I have things to bring to the table just because they have more money or have been doing this longer or are taller than me, which is most of the world, you know, like it's so crazy because I've never really kind of gone back to the primal reason that occurs, but it's been so frustrating. It's such a big thing. Like, why do I get that way? Why do I lose all sense of rationale when I enter in that situation? It makes complete sense.
Yeah, you're going into survival without realizing. You're going to fight, flight, or freeze, right? So the reason being is, again, I think the root of all of our fears is rejection and abandonment, right? And when I talk about fears versus danger, I want to explain this part too, right? So trust this, going back to trust, right? This is the theme. If you're in actual danger, you're going to act on instinct. You're not, for example, I'm just going to use, if a bear were to jump through your window right now, right? Are you thinking about how scared you are?
I don't think so.
No,
I think
you're probably not thinking about it being afraid. You're not even thinking, you're just reacting. Right. So you're operating now on survival, right? Instinct. But, you know, going to your wife and, you know, sharing something about yourself that is deeply insecure, terrifying.
Yeah, for sure.
Right. We're afraid of rejection. We're afraid of being abandoned. Right. We're afraid that if you knew this about me, it would prove that I'm unlovable and you'll leave me. Right. And if you leave me in the wild, I'm the first to die. Right. So it seems extreme to think that every decision you're making is based on life and death. But this is why I don't believe there's any such thing as overreaction. There's no such thing as an overreaction. Right. From the perspective of your nervous system, right? It's responding in direct relationship to the degree of threat it believes is in the environment. If you leave me, I'm dead.
Yeah.
That's a pretty big threat.
It is.
Right. So when we're able to understand that, you know, our nervous system is hardwired to keep us alive, not happy. Right. Because here's another thing. So there's this whole conversation in like positive psychology where it's like, you know, everything needs to be optimistic and you need to find joy and bliss forever. Right. But let's look at this from a primitive perspective. So you're a hunter, right?
Yes.
Okay. So we're going to say, this is going to get morbid. Is that okay?
That's fine.
All right. My analogies just crashed together. And I'm like, oh, that sounds fucking awful. But I'm going to run with it because it's going to prove a point. So let's say that we're going to go hunting for a victim. I'm going to let you decide what that is. Okay. And on one side, on our left side, let's say we see one and they're in complete joy, bliss. What behavior might you see of something in complete joy?
Having sex.
Amazing, right?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Right. But so what's their are they aware of dangers in their environment? Well,
probably not.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So another way you'd say is like enjoy too. I hear people describe it a lot of times is like, you know, oh, they're skipping and they're whistling and they're looking up in the sky and they're enjoying everything around them.
I go
right?
straight to sex. Yeah.
Yeah. You're
everything.
Hey, just enjoying your life.
Yes.
Right. But it's the same thing. Right. So you have so you have complete joy on one side. Right. Now, remember, we're looking for a target. On the other side, you have something that is extremely anxious and paranoid. Right. What's the behavior you may see in that individual?
Right. Yeah. Shiftiness, hiding.
Right. Which one's the easier target?
I would think it's the shifty one personally.
But, easier target.
Okay. So oblivious, joyful person. Okay.
Think about it. Right. How aware is the guy having sex to his threats?
He's not aware at all. I don't know why I didn't.
Not aware at all.
Yeah.
But the shifty, anxious one, hyper vigilant.
Yeah.
Right. So again, primitively speaking, in the wild, joy equals death.
Gotcha.
because I've let my guard down. So, for example, now let's go to modern day. We're with our partners, right? We're with our wife, and they're asking us to, just be in the moment, be present. To a traumatized brain or to a nervous system that is hyper vigilant, peace and joy is the greatest threat.
Oh, that's deep.
Right? Because it's another way to describe it. It's like you're asking someone that's been in survival their whole lives to drop their guard, right? It's like, if we were in a standoff and each of us had our gun drawn on one another, right? We're talking to each other like saying, put yours down. No, put yours down. No, put yours down. Right? And eventually one of us is like, okay, I'm going to lead. Right? I'm going to start putting mine down. And the moment the other person even makes a slight movement, gun's drawn right back up. Right? You're not going to take advantage of me.
Right.
Welcome to relationships.
Yeah.
Both of you. So this is the biggest thing that I learned in my relationship with Allison and learning, right? It's a lifestyle. It's not a destination, right? Which is that, and she's the one that instilled this. She would constantly talk about, like, especially when I was in my deep insecurities and rage and stuff, she would constantly talk about, she's like, same team. We're on the same team. Right? And it took me years to understand what that meant. I knew what it meant, like, conversation. Right. But it took me years to trust that, oh, wow, she's not my enemy. Just because she's bringing up all my insecurities doesn't make her my enemy. Right? We're on the same team. And when we learn, when you would rather, it's like, again, going back to sports, the reason why in football you do scrimmages versus first team offense, first team defense, right? The intention is to make each other better by exposing the weaknesses. You'd rather do that in practice than the championship game.
Right.
Right. I'd rather my teammate expose my struggles so we can work through it than I would someone in the streets. So when we see our partner as our teammate, right, not our enemy, not our threat, and this takes time, it takes conscious effort, right? It takes awareness, it takes humility, and it takes a lot of fucking courage to put your gun down when you're operating subconsciously in survival.
Yeah. So do you think that the majority of, let's just pick on men. Do you think the majority of men are still operating in survival mode?
The majority of human beings.
Yeah.
Right. So we're born into learning how to consume our needs of safety. Right. So that 0 to 6, what we learn, because we're completely unconscious, right? So you're born into an environment, you have to identify and adapt to that environment, right? It's what you're wired to do. So essentially what we're learning how to do is perform for our safety. If I act a certain way, my father will tell me he's proud of me. If I act a certain way, my mother tells me she loves me. If I act a certain way, I get fed. If I act a certain way, I get in trouble, right? I get grounded. I get rejected, right? I'm abandoned if I act a certain way, right? We call it discipline. To the child, it's abandonment. It's rejection. They don't know any different. How could they, right? They're a child. So what we learn is how to perform for our safety. And then we grow into our teenage years, our adult years, and the world around us says, go create your own safety. Well, no one ever taught us how. So what we do is we subconsciously seek out individuals that match our patterns because they're familiar. It may not be what's best, but it's what's most predictable. And if I can predict it, I can survive it. This is why people are like, it's an abusive relationship. Why don't, like, it's, better, just get out. It's not conscious, right? Because here's the thing. If let's say someone's in an abusive relationship, right? If they've been in that relationship long enough, they at least identify the triggers.
Right.
They know how bad it gets when it's at its worst. And because they've seen it, they now believe they can survive it. So imagine this person operating with this belief that abusive relationships are inevitable. Everyone's going to abuse me, right? Well, what's the scariest thing to that person that believes every single person will abuse them, right? Being in an abusive relationship that matches that belief, at least I can predict it, or leaving that predictable, unhealthy, but predictable relationship and meeting someone who is really sweet and amazing and attentive and nurturing and all this. Again, to a nervous system that is conditioned with trauma and chaos, Peace is what happens just before the storm. Right? So the longer this person's nice to me, the scarier they become. It's like driving with your eyes closed. It's fun for a fraction of a second.
I'm sure that this is poking people really, really hard right now, because I think a lot of us not only tend to operate in those ways and those mannerisms and don't understand it. I think a lot of us are dealing with people in our lives that operate in those ways and we don't understand it. And we just look at it as hurtful. But you know, it's a story I tell on almost every podcast because it just seems to be so relevant. It's like walking into a restroom that's horrifically smelling, and you walk in, but you got to do your thing. So you go in and you sit there for a while and you come out and you wash your hands and you're taking your time. Someone walks in and you notice that they are just absolutely blasted with the stink. You've been sitting in it for so long. That's what you now know. People in these relationships are sitting in this, and that's what they know. And that knowing is safety.
Familiar equals predictable. Predictable equals survival. So again, when you're asking yourself to go beyond your comfort zones, you're stepping into unknown territory. Starting a business, falling in love, it's all unknown, right? So the moment that you do it, your nervous system triggers signals rather threat to your survival. So you're putting your guns up, right? It looks like anger, it looks like shutting down, it looks like running away, right? All the above, depending, right? But you're protecting yourself from this unknown, this uncertain future, right? So when people talk about self-sabotage, you're not sabotaging anything, right? Sabotage is not a sign of weakness or inferiority or brokenness. Sabotage is proof that your nervous system is working exactly as it was designed. Because what sabotage actually is, sabotage equals survival. Because when we go beyond our comfort zone into unfamiliar territory, we sabotage to recalibrate back into what we can predict, right? So for example, if I'm broke my whole life and I win the lottery, why is there a lottery curse? You're too far beyond your comfort zone. Right. So you spin, and eventually you end up back exactly where you're most familiar, broke. Because at least I know how to operate here. I can survive this.
Yeah. I love that human nature, that human behavior, physiological, psychological. Basically, if I were to kind of wrap this up in a bow, which is really basic, literally your ability to break through in relationships, business, finances, all those places that people really want to have breakthrough. This is the key. It's literally the key is taking control of and understanding why we go into this.
So let me
primal response.
Yeah. Let me button this up real easily. So human beings require safety, a sense of safety to do anything new, right? So people are like, okay, so if I'm hardwired to avoid pain, right? Insecurities are painful, and hardwired to avoid anything that I've never experienced before. Well, how the hell do I become something I've never been, right? How do I create anything new if my body is designed to keep me from doing that, right? It's safety. Now, I talk a lot on purpose, right? So I'm going to make this kind of quick. So I believe purpose has a formula, right? And it's specifically this: it's pain plus passion times safety equals purpose. Okay. So what do these things mean? Pain is the ability to extract the wisdom from your deepest struggles, right? Being able to extract from your pain, your deepest, darkest, the dark night of the soul. It's being able to extract the wisdom from that experience, not just the pain, right? Not just the suffering. So you have that wisdom now plus passion. Passion is simply the shit you like to do, right? The problem I find that a lot of people, when they talk about purpose, is they think purpose is found inside of their passions. Not true. This is why people can become super successful at some shit they love and be void of all meaning.
Yep.
Right. Feel even more, it's a false summit, right? They're even more depressed once they achieve the thing because they realize it was never it to begin with. Right. So your passion is a vehicle in which you get to deliver that wisdom to the world. Right. For example, I'm a truck guy. So imagine you just bought the most beautiful truck you've ever seen in your entire life, right? The one you've been dreaming about since you were a child. What's more important to you, that specific truck or the people that are riding in it? Right?
Yeah.
I would imagine the people in it, right?
I would hope so.
Right. So would I. Otherwise, I need to be in a different truck.
Yeah.
Right. So it's not the truck. The truck is what we desire, right? That's the passion.
Gotcha.
It's the vehicle in which we get to deliver the wisdom, the people that matter in this case, right? To whatever the destination is, right? So you have pain plus passion times safety. Why do I multiply safety? Because I don't think in human history anyone has ever overdosed on safety. Right? It's the core of every single human behavior. Doesn't matter if it's extreme violence or extreme isolation, safety is the motivating factor. Okay. So what is safety in this equation? It's qualified support. It's mentorship from someone who has been where you are going. That is the only way that we can feel just safe enough to do something we've never done, is to be supported by someone next to us that has gone through it. For example, pick a bucket list city you've never been to before. If we were to jump on a plane today, where are we going?
Well, I'm going to Bora Bora. It's going to take me a while to get there, but yeah.
Right. So have you ever been?
No.
No. Okay. So let's say we go to Bora Bora, right? So we land today. Now you have two options. You can either take the map. We're going to go old school, right? The physical map that you can carry, not the iPhone shit. So you can either take a map and go explore Bora Bora on your own, or you can hire a local. Which one feels more safe?
Well, that's interesting. I would prefer to hire a local.
100%, right?
Yeah.
And we're assuming the local's on the up and up. Okay.
Right.
So why hire a local versus taking a map that clearly has all the information you need?
They're going to help you avoid the bad spots.
Bad spots. They know all the secrets. Yep. They know the best, the best drink. They know where to get the best sandwich. They know all this. They know that they know it all. They've been there. Right. So here's the thing. This one adventure. So if we're out in Bora Bora on our own, no support, we feel lost. We're in Bora Bora with a tour guide. It's an adventure because you feel safe. So you're able to explore the unknown with a sense of curiosity and excitement and joy when you are supported by someone who knows what they're doing.
Right.
Coaches, therapists, mentors. We cannot create anything new without qualified support. You'll never do it. It's not because you're incapable, right? It's because you're hardwired to avoid it. Now,
yeah, I think that's good.
So last thing I want to talk about here, time-wise, are we good if I have the elephant story?
Go for it.
Okay. So I have a photo that I use in my teaching a lot. It's a drawing because the real photos are a little too much for me. But an elephant back in the days where there was traveling circuses, right? So back in the day, original, Barnum and Bailey stuff. So you may have seen this in photos or videos, but they would, go to these big fairgrounds or these big open plots of land and set up their circus. Well, the elephants are obviously massive creatures, right? So in the early days, they would have the elephant shackled with one ankle to a stake in the ground. Mm-hmm. All right, you ever see this image?
I think so.
Okay. So if you've ever seen this image, you may have thought to yourself, well, how the hell does that keep the elephant there? Like, it's a massive creature. This thing is powerful. You're telling me that fucking stake in the ground is going to keep that elephant at bay? Not a chance, right? So why doesn't the elephant ever break it? Here's why. And I believe human beings are exact same. When an elephant is born into that environment, right, it's going to be a traveling circus elephant. They, as a baby, they put that elephant on the exact same chain or rope to the exact same stake that it will be on as an adult, right? The difference is the baby isn't strong enough yet to break it, but it's going to try, and it tries, and it tries, and it tries. And it's making itself bleed, and it's trying, and it's trying day after day after day after day, weeks, months, maybe, But what they learned is what will break. So I'll say it this way, the elephant's belief that it's capable of breaking the chain will break before it's strong enough to physically break the chain. So its belief in itself breaks before it's strong enough to actually break the chain. So what happens is by the time it grows big enough, strong enough, powerful enough to shatter that fucking snake or that chain, it never even tries. Because it believes it can't. And I believe this is what happens to human beings as well. And I don't think it's intentional, right? It's circumstantial, and we could spend 3 more hours on this, right, to make it really make sense. But understand that your early childhood conditioning, before you were big enough, strong enough, smart enough, rich enough to do the things that you wanted to do today, right? You learned in that 0 to 6, 0 to 7, that you weren't something enough. And it's as if you're a full-grown elephant today that's fully capable of shattering those chains, but you never try because you don't believe you can.
That's good. It's really good. I mean, the power of conditioning is tremendous. It's ridiculous. And if you listen to any of my podcasts, you've heard me talk about, like, you will not get as far without a mentor or a coach in any circumstance. It's just the differentiator between stagnance and growth. There's just no way around it.
There's 2 motivating. The motivation's always survival, right? So you have people that are in dire straits that are surviving, and they make the most because because they were homeless and hungry and, exposed to the elements, and their willpower is immense because they had to be, right? Yep. But the majority of us are in environments that are quite comfortable, right? And our basic human needs to survive are matched. Therefore, our motivation to create something new doesn't exist, not because we're lazy, but because, according to my nervous system, for what? We're good here. Why would you go venture off into the unknown wilderness where they can attack you and do shit that you can't predict and kill you, when you could just stay right here, binge watch this Netflix series, order another pizza, and let go of your dreams?
Yeah.
It's much safer.
Let that sink in, listeners. What are you not doing now, and what are you reverting to and participating in that is your safety zone? I think that's
favorite question, and that is, what's your preferred method of sabotage?
Yeah. And a lot of people, it's just what you said: TV, bad relationships, horrible jobs. I mean, it's so common.
In the sake of candor, one of the biggest ones for men.
What's that?
Porn.
Oh yeah. Porn. But you're not rejected. You get it every time.
Every time.
It's so
Guarantee.
false. It's so screwed up.
Dopamine hit the whole 9.
Yeah.
So it's,
I kind of feel like that's one of the biggest sources of creating the lack of courage. I mean, there's no courage in it. There's no risk.
And that's in your hardwired to avoid risk.
Yeah.
So no wonder. So an addiction isn't a flaw. It's a biological necessity. You identified a way to meet a need without expressing any energy whatsoever, or very little. Great. Got it. Keep going. What else do you want to do?
Yeah. It's not a way to live, though.
Oh, no. That's you surviving, but you're not living.
Right. Matthew, give us the details, man. This has been phenomenal. And I think really the whole point of all of this is, like, really, I think any listener, like, if one piece of this kind of resonated with you and you don't know how to deal with it, which you probably don't, like, really, you probably don't, you can't do it alone, then you probably need to listen to the details. Give us your details.
I gave you a lot of them.
No, I mean, give us your resources. How do we find you? What do we, you mentioned the book.
Yeah, it's on IG, it's just my name, right? And that's really the only place I'm on other platforms profile wise, but I'm not really there.
Right.
So IG is the easiest way to get in direct contact with me. And like I said, as far as professionally speaking, I focus primarily on working with coaches, mentors, leaders, to better understand themselves biologically, so they can create the safety they need to make the impact they desire. Right. And yes. I just made all that shit up in a second. So I want to record that and type that out later.
You should give it come back on this, because that's really cool. You're impacting the impactors, really.
And that's why I love working with coaches specifically. It's because you don't get to that state. What that tells me is, like, you've come to a point in your journey where you've decided that you want to be of service to others.
Mm-hmm.
that's where shit gets real.
Yeah.
Right. So there's the therapy stage, right? That understanding, kind of going through it. I feel broken, recognizing you're not. You get to the next level where it's like, oh shit, I have something a value that I can offer the world, right? My wisdom from my pain, right? Great. Now I want to be of service. That's the point of the journey, who I love to support, because, that's from that day forward, everything is going to be unknown, right? But you're unknown with a purpose, with intention. You're not just roaming aimlessly. Mm-hmm. Right. So I like to work with those in the trenches. I often say, like, you don't get a coach, you get a teammate.
Yeah.
Right. We're going to be on the field together. We're both going to come back tattered and muddy and bloody. And that's the point.
It's good. It's good. Yeah. Thanks, brother.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Anything else you want to leave with?
How many more hours you got?
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I'll take that as a cue. Yeah, man, I really appreciate it. I learned a lot about myself. I mean, I do have a degree in psychology. I've gone through all of this stuff, but it's the unpacking of it and the understanding and storytelling that was really impactful. So I appreciate that.
Absolutely.
Thank you for listening to the Brotherhood of Fatherhood podcast. If you enjoyed the podcast, be sure to share it with your friends, your family, and follow us on social media. If you are a father, make sure you join our Facebook group, the Brotherhood of Fatherhood. Hit the subscribe button and tune in next time for more podcasts from the Brotherhood of Fatherhood.